crash echoed through the dark practice room, followed by a voice Hyunjin had never expected to hear trembling. "Please, just leave me alone." The words froze him in place. For a moment, Hyunjin thought he had entered the wrong room. The Felix he knew was always smiling, always the first to comfort others, always carrying everyone's burdens as if they weighed nothing. But the figure sitting on the floor near the mirrored wall looked nothing like that Felix. The room was dim except for a single fluorescent light flickering overhead. Rain tapped against the windows, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of gold and silver. Felix sat with his back against the mirror, his hands were shaking. Hyunjin had never seen that before, not once, not during exhausting schedules, not during injuries, not during sleepless nights, never. Felix quickly wiped his face and turned away. "I said leave." Sharpness in his voice felt unnatural. Hyunjin slowly stepped closer. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating. Then he noticed something strange. A small notebook lay beside Felix. Its pages were scattered across the floor, and every page was covered with the same sentence. "I am tired," again and again and again, hundreds of times. Hyunjin's chest tightened. "Felix, don't." Felix's voice cracked. That single crack shattered something inside Hyunjin, because it wasn't anger, it wasn't annoyance, it was pain, raw pain. The kind that had been hidden for far too long. The rain intensified outside. Thunder rumbled across the city. For several seconds neither of them spoke. Then Felix laughed, a horrible laugh, empty, broken. "I really thought I could keep pretending forever." Hyunjin slowly sat beside him. "You don't have to pretend." "Yes, I do." Stared at the floor. "No one wants to see this version of me." Hyunjin felt a wave of helplessness. For years he had believed he understood Felix. Maybe not completely, but enough. Now he realized he had only known the version Felix allowed everyone to see. The cheerful version, the strong version, the dependable version, not this one, not the frightened person sitting beside him. Felix closed his eyes, his fingers tightened around the notebook. "I can't remember the last time I slept without waking up feeling afraid." Hyunjin remained silent, listening, waiting, the way Felix had done for others countless times. "I keep thinking that if I stop smiling, everyone will leave." His voice had become barely audible. "I know it sounds stupid." "It doesn't." Swallowed hard. "You know what's funny?" Hyunjin shook his head. "I spend so much time making sure everyone else is okay that I forgot how to tell people I'm not." The confession lingered between them, heavy, painful, honest. Hyunjin looked at the rain running down the glass. For years Felix had been the light in every room. The person who noticed when someone was struggling. The person who stayed behind after everyone else had left. The person who carried invisible burdens without complaint. And somehow nobody had noticed he was drowning, not even Hyunjin. That realization hurt more than he expected. The silence stretched, then Felix suddenly spoke again. "Do you ever feel like you're disappearing?" Hyunjin looked at him. Felix wasn't crying anymore. That somehow made everything worse. His eyes looked exhausted. As if he had spent years fighting battles nobody could see. "Sometimes I wake up and I don't know who I am without making other people happy." His voice trembled. "If I can't do that anymore, what's left?" The question wasn't directed at Hyunjin, it was directed at himself. Perhaps it had haunted him for years. Hyunjin struggled to find the right words. Every response felt inadequate, every answer felt too small. Finally he spoke. "You're Felix," laughed weakly. "That doesn't mean anything." "It means everything." Turned toward him, confusion flickered across his face. Hyunjin continued. "You think people stay because of what you do for them?" The room fell silent. "They stay because of who you are." Looked away, his eyes glistened. "That's hard to believe." "I know." Thunder echoed again. The building creaked softly around them. Hyunjin stared at the scattered notebook pages. Each page represented a moment Felix had suffered alone, a moment nobody had noticed. A moment hidden behind another smile, another joke, another reassuring word. The thought made him sick. "Long?" Felix understood the question immediately. "Long enough." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Felix's answer came instantly. "Because everyone already has enough problems." The simplicity of the answer was devastating. Hyunjin lowered his head. Of course, that was exactly what Felix would think. Even now, even at his lowest, he was worried about burdening other people. The rain slowly began to fade outside. The storm was moving away. Yet inside the practice room the atmosphere remained heavy. Felix leaned his head against the mirror. His reflection stared back at him. Tired, vulnerable, human. "I don't know how to be weak." The confession emerged as little more than a whisper. Hyunjin's throat tightened, because Felix wasn't weak, not now, not ever. It took incredible strength to survive while carrying this much pain, and even more strength to finally admit it. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore." Stared forward. For a long time he said nothing. Then something changed, almost imperceptibly. A tiny shift, a wall beginning to crack, a burden becoming slightly lighter. His shoulders relaxed, only a little, but enough for Hyunjin to notice, enough for hope. The first pale light of dawn slowly appeared beyond the rain-covered windows. Night was ending. The city below was beginning to wake. Felix looked toward the horizon. The exhaustion remained, the fear remained. The uncertainty remained, but for the first time in a very long time he wasn't facing them alone. And as the morning sunlight gradually filled the room, Hyunjin sat beside him in silence, understanding one thing with painful clarity. He had known Felix's laughter. He had known Felix's kindness. He had known Felix's strength. but this was the first time he had truly seen Felix, and he would never forget how fragile that moment looked beneath the light of a new day. The sunrise painted the practice room in soft shades of gold, but neither Hyunjin nor Felix moved. The scattered notebook pages remained on the floor like silent witnesses to a secret that had finally escaped into the open. Felix stared out the window. His eyes followed the distant traffic below. The city was waking up. People were heading to work. Stores were opening. Life continued as if nothing had happened, as if his world had not quietly fallen apart. "You should go home," Felix finally said. Hyunjin didn't answer. Seriously, still no answer. Felix turned toward him. "Been here all night, so have you?" Felix sighed. For a brief moment, something close to his old smile appeared, then disappeared again. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was different now, less guarded, less lonely. For years, Felix had become an expert at hiding, every emotion carefully locked away, every fear disguised behind a bright grin, every sleepless night buried beneath endless energy. But now someone knew, someone had seen the cracks, and strangely enough, the world hadn't ended. That realization felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. Hyunjin slowly picked up one of the notebook pages from the floor. Felix immediately reached for it. "No." Hyunjin stopped, his expression softened. "I'm not judging you." Felix looked away. "I know," but embarrassment flooded through him anyway. The pages represented everything he had tried to hide, every exhausted thought, every moment of hopelessness, every silent breakdown. They weren't supposed to exist outside his mind, yet here they were spread across the room, impossible to deny. "I started writing because I couldn't sleep." His voice was quiet. Hyunjin listened. At first it helped. Felix stared at his hands. Then it became a habit. Memory made his chest tighten. "Whenever things got bad, I'd write." Hyunjin carefully placed the paper back down. Did it help? Felix considered the question. "A little," then he laughed softly. "But not enough." Honesty of the answer lingered between them. Outside, the sky continued brightening. The storm clouds had completely disappeared, yet Felix still felt trapped beneath them. Months, maybe years, everything had blended together. Schedules, performances, interviews, fans, smiles, always smiling, always being okay. The pressure had become so familiar that he no longer noticed its weight. Until recently. Recently, everything felt heavier. The expectations, the responsibility, the fear of disappointing people, the fear of becoming a burden, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of not being enough. Those fears had begun following him everywhere, into practice rooms, into hotel rooms, into dreams, into every quiet moment. He had spent so long fighting them that he couldn't remember who he was without them. Hyunjin suddenly stood. Felix blinked. "What are you doing? Coming back?" "What?" Hyunjin stretched. "My apartment." Felix frowned. "What does your apartment have to do with anything?" Hyunjin grabbed his jacket. "Coming with me?" "Definitely yes." Felix shook his head immediately. "I don't want to bother anyone." Hyunjin laughed. "There it is." Felix looked confused. "What?" "That thing you always do." "What thing?" "You decide what everyone else feels before they get a chance to tell you." Felix opened his mouth, then closed it again, because unfortunately Hyunjin had a point, a very annoying point. "Be fine." Hyunjin crossed his arms. "You said that yesterday." Felix winced, and the day before that, another wince, and apparently every day for the past several years. Felix groaned. "Stop." "No." Hyunjin's voice softened. This time, something about those words hit harder than Felix expected. Not this time. For years, everyone had accepted his answers. Everyone had accepted the smile, the reassurance, the excuses, but Hyunjin wasn't accepting them anymore. Part of Felix wanted to argue, another part felt relieved. They left the practice room together. The hallway was empty. Morning sunlight filtered through the building's glass walls. Everything looked ordinary, yet Felix felt strangely exposed, as if everyone could suddenly see through him, every insecurity, every fear, every hidden scar. His exhaustion weighed heavily on his body. The sleepless nights were finally catching up with him. By the time they reached the parking lot, he could barely keep his eyes open. Hyunjin noticed immediately. "You haven't slept at all, have you?" Felix avoided eye contact. That was answer enough. The drive across the city was quiet. Rainwater still glistened on the roads. Sunlight reflected from skyscraper windows. The world looked beautiful. Felix barely noticed. His thoughts felt distant, heavy, fragmented. At some point during the drive, he fell asleep, completely without realizing it. The moment shocked Hyunjin, because Felix never slept around other people, not anymore. His anxiety usually kept him awake, even when exhausted. Yet now he sat quietly in the passenger seat, head resting against the window, breathing steady, peaceful for the first time in what felt like forever. Hyunjin glanced over. Something tightened painfully inside his chest. Felix looked younger when he slept, softer. More vulnerable, as if all the walls disappeared, as if the person beneath the pressure finally emerged. Hyunjin realized then how exhausted his friend truly was, not physically, emotionally, the kind of exhaustion that couldn't be fixed by one night's sleep, the kind that accumulated over years, the kind that silently hollowed people out from the inside. A few minutes later they arrived. Hyunjin parked, but Felix didn't wake up. The sight stunned him. Felix had fallen so deeply asleep that even the car stopping hadn't disturbed him. For several moments Hyunjin simply sat there, watching, thinking, remembering every smile Felix had forced, every joke, every moment nobody questioned because it seemed normal. How much pain had hidden behind all of them, how much had they missed? A sharp wave of guilt hit him, then another, and another, because friendship wasn't supposed to work this way. You weren't supposed to discover someone was drowning after they nearly sank. You were supposed to notice sooner. Hyunjin slowly looked away. The morning sun illuminated the sleeping city. A new day had begun. And although neither of them knew what would happen next, one thing was certain. The road ahead would not be easy. Healing never was. But for the first time, Felix would not be walking that road by himself. And somewhere deep inside the exhaustion that had consumed him for so long, a tiny spark of hope had finally begun to return.
Felix woke to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and the faint sound of music playing somewhere in the apartment. For several seconds he didn't know where he was. His eyes slowly adjusted to the sunlight pouring through the curtains. The couch beneath him felt unfamiliar. The blanket draped over his body wasn't his, neither was the room. Then the memories returned, the practice room, the notebook, the tears, Hyunjin. A wave of embarrassment instantly swept through him. He sat up too quickly and immediately regretted it. His head felt heavy, his muscles ached. His body reminded him just how little rest he had gotten during the past few months. The apartment was quiet, peaceful, a strange contrast to the chaos that had occupied his mind for so long. Felix rubbed his face. Part of him wished last night had been a dream, not because he regretted opening up, but because vulnerability still felt unfamiliar, dangerous. Growing up, he had learned to become dependable, to stay strong, to smile through difficulties. Somewhere along the way, asking for help had started feeling like failure. Even now, after everything that happened, that belief still lingered. He slowly stood and walked toward the kitchen. Hyunjin was standing by the counter. His sleeves were rolled up, a frying pan sizzled softly. For a moment, everything looked surprisingly normal, like any ordinary morning. Then Hyunjin noticed him. Alive, Felix blinked. What kind of greeting is that? The accurate kind. Felix rolled his eyes. The reaction made Hyunjin smile, a real smile, the first one Felix had seen since yesterday. Long did I sleep? Hyunjin handed him a glass of water. Almost 12 hours. Felix nearly dropped it. 12, you were exhausted. Answer came gently, no judgment, no criticism, just concern. Felix stared into the glass. 12 hours. He couldn't remember the last time he had slept that long, or that deeply. Normally his sleep was interrupted by anxious thoughts, nightmares, random fears, but last night there had been nothing, just darkness and rest. The realization felt almost unreal. Hyunjin placed a plate of food on the table. Eat, I'm not hungry. You said that yesterday too, Felix sighed. You keep using my own words against me. I'll continue doing it. The first time in days, a small laugh escaped Felix. The sound surprised both of them because it sounded genuine, not forced. Not performed, real. The moment disappeared quickly, but it left something behind, something lighter, something warmer. As they ate, silence settled comfortably between them. Not every silence needed to be filled. Eventually, Hyunjin spoke. Do you want to tell me when it started? Felix froze. The question wasn't unexpected, yet hearing it aloud made his chest tighten. He looked down at his food. The answer wasn't simple. There had been no single moment, no dramatic collapse, no obvious beginning. Pain rarely arrived that way. Instead, it accumulated quietly, one disappointment at a time, one fear at a time, one sleepless night at a time, until suddenly it became impossible to ignore. I don't know. Hyunjin waited. It just kept getting worse. His voice was barely audible. Every time something good happened, I worried about losing it. He stared at the table. Every time someone praised me, I felt pressure to be even better. His fingers tightened around the fork. And every time I made a mistake, I felt like everyone would eventually realize I wasn't enough. The words poured out slowly, painfully, like opening an old wound. Hyunjin listened without interrupting. Felix continued. I thought if I worked harder it would go away. A bitter smile appeared. It didn't. Apartment fell silent again. Outside, sunlight danced across nearby buildings, cars passed below, life continued. Yet inside the room, years of hidden emotions were finally being spoken aloud. I kept waiting to feel okay again. Felix looked toward the window, but I couldn't remember what okay felt like anymore. Confession lingered in the air, heavy, honest, heartbreaking. Hyunjin lowered his gaze. Hearing the truth was difficult because it explained so much: the forced smiles, the exhaustion, the moments when Felix seemed present physically but absent mentally. The signs had always been there, nobody had connected them together, including him. A knot formed in his chest. I'm sorry. Felix looked surprised. What, for not noticing? Answer came immediately, without hesitation, without excuses. Felix stared at him, then shook his head. You don't have to apologize. I should have seen it. Couldn't. Certainty in Felix's voice made Hyunjin look up. For a moment their eyes met, and Felix offered a sad smile, the kind that came from understanding, the kind that carried years of experience hiding pain. I made sure nobody could. Truth hit harder than either of them expected. Because it was true. Felix had become incredibly skilled at disguising his suffering, not because he wanted attention, Not because he wanted sympathy, because he was afraid of disappointing people, afraid of being treated differently. Afraid of becoming a burden. The fears had trapped him inside his own silence, and silence had almost destroyed him. Hours passed. The conversation drifted between serious topics and lighter memories, old jokes, funny mistakes, stories from years ago. For the first time in a long while, Felix felt something unfamiliar, safe, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to breathe, enough to exist without pretending every second. As afternoon faded into evening, the sunlight softened, orange and gold spilled across the apartment walls. The world outside seemed calmer, so did Felix, at least on the surface. Yet deep inside, questions remained. Healing wasn't instant. Pain didn't disappear overnight. The fears were still there, waiting, watching. Whispering, but now there was something else standing beside them. Hope, small, fragile, yet undeniably present. Later that evening, Felix stood alone on the balcony. Cool wind brushed against his face. The city stretched endlessly before him, thousands of lights illuminating the growing darkness. For months he had felt disconnected from everything, like a spectator watching someone else's life. Now, for the first time, he felt grounded, not fixed, not healed, but present. A soft sound behind him made him turn. Hyunjin stepped onto the balcony. Neither spoke immediately. The city lights reflected in their eyes. Then Hyunjin quietly asked, "What do you want to do now?" Felix looked toward the horizon. The answer came slowly, not because he didn't know, because saying it aloud felt terrifying. Finally he spoke. "I think," his voice trembled slightly, "I want to learn how to stop surviving." The evening wind carried the words into the night. And for the first time in years, Felix realized he wanted more than simply making it through each day. He wanted to live, truly live. And somewhere beyond the city lights, beyond the fears and exhaustion that had followed him for so long, a future he had almost given up on was quietly waiting for him. The following morning felt different, not dramatically different, not like the ending of a movie where everything suddenly becomes brighter and every problem disappears. It was subtler than that, the kind of difference that could only be felt in small moments. Felix noticed it when he woke up. For the first time in months, the weight on his chest wasn't the first thing he felt. It was still there, but lighter, distant, as if someone had loosened chains he had forgotten he was wearing. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, filling the apartment with a soft golden glow. He lay still for several minutes, listening. No racing thoughts, no panic, no immediate dread, just silence, peaceful silence. The realization almost made him emotional, because he couldn't remember the last time a morning had felt like this. Eventually he sat up and looked out the window. The city was alive below, people moving, cars passing, life continuing. For years he had watched scenes like this while feeling detached from them, like he existed behind glass, watching but never participating. Now something felt different, not fixed, not healed, but possible. As he walked into the kitchen, he found Hyunjin sitting at the table, scrolling through his phone. Awake, Felix nodded. Unfortunately, Hyunjin smirked. There he is. There who is, the sarcastic Felix. Felix rolled his eyes, yet a smile appeared despite himself. Hyunjin noticed immediately. The genuine kind, not the practiced one, not the smile designed to reassure everyone else. A real smile, small but real, and somehow that felt like progress. The day passed quietly, no schedules, no cameras, no expectations, just normal life, something Felix hadn't realized he desperately needed. They spent part of the afternoon walking through a nearby park. The sky was clear, children laughed near a fountain, dogs chased each other across the grass. The scent of flowers drifted through the warm air. Everything felt strangely vivid, as if his senses were waking up after being asleep for a long time. At one point they sat beneath a large tree overlooking the river. Neither spoke for several minutes. The silence felt comfortable, natural. Felix watched sunlight dance across the water. Then suddenly he asked, "Do you ever regret things you never said?" Hyunjin glanced toward him. The question sounded casual, but he knew better. There was something deeper beneath it. "Sometimes," Felix nodded slowly. His gaze remained fixed on the river. "I think I do." A breeze moved through the trees, leaves rustled softly overhead. "What didn't you say?" Felix laughed quietly. "There are too many things." Answer wasn't entirely a joke. For years he had swallowed words, hidden feelings, ignored fears, pretended everything was fine. Eventually the silence had become habit, a dangerous habit, one that almost convinced him nobody would understand even if he spoke. The notebook had become proof of that. Page after page filled with thoughts he never shared, conversations that existed only in his head, questions nobody ever heard, pain nobody ever saw until now. A strange expression crossed his face. "Do you know something embarrassing?" Hyunjin immediately looked interested. "This should be good," Felix groaned. "I already regret asking." Late, Felix looked away, a faint blush appearing. "There were so many times I wanted to ask for help." Hyunjin's expression softened. "But I always convinced myself not to." Smile vanished from Felix's face. "I kept telling myself I could handle everything." His voice grew quieter, "And when I couldn't," He paused, the words felt difficult. I felt ashamed. Hyunjin stared at him, the confession sounded simple, yet it explained years of suffering. Because shame was powerful, it convinced people to suffer silently. It transformed vulnerability into weakness. It turned asking for help into something terrifying. And Felix had been carrying that shame for far too long. There's nothing shameful about struggling. Felix laughed softly. Know that? Then why don't you believe it? The question hit its target immediately. Felix looked down because he didn't have an answer, or perhaps he did, and it was simply difficult to admit. For most of his life he had been praised for being strong, reliable, supportive, the person people leaned on. Over time he began believing that was his role, his responsibility, his identity. If he stopped being strong, who was he? If he needed support, what happened to the version of himself everyone depended on? The fear had followed him everywhere, even now, yet something had changed. Because now he was beginning to realize strength wasn't what he thought it was. Strength wasn't carrying pain alone until it crushed you. Strength wasn't pretending everything was fine. Strength wasn't suffering in silence. Perhaps real strength was honesty. Perhaps real strength was allowing people to see the parts of you that weren't perfect. The realization lingered in his mind long after their conversation ended. That evening they returned to the apartment. The sky outside slowly darkened. Stars appeared one by one. The city lights glowed beneath them. Felix found himself standing on the balcony again. The same place where he had spoken about wanting to stop surviving. The memory felt distant already, not because it wasn't important. Because something inside him had already begun shifting. The door behind him opened. Hyunjin stepped outside carrying 2 cups of tea. He handed one over. Felix accepted it. The warmth spread through his hands. For several moments they simply stood there, watching the city, watching the night. Then Hyunjin spoke quietly. You know what I think? Felix sighed dramatically. Here we go. I think you've spent so long trying to protect everyone else that you forgot people want to protect you too. The words settled gently between them, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just true, painfully true. Felix stared at the lights below. Something tightened in his chest, not sadness, not exactly, something warmer, something softer, the feeling of finally understanding something important. Perhaps he wasn't as alone as he thought, perhaps he never had been. Perhaps the people who loved him had been waiting all along, waiting for him to stop hiding, waiting for him to trust them enough to let them in. A faint smile appeared, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than happiness, the kind born from hope. And as the cool evening wind moved through the city, Felix realized that healing wasn't a destination waiting somewhere far ahead. It was these conversations, these moments, these small steps forward, one day at a time, one honest word at a time, one breath at a time. And for the first time in years, that future no longer felt impossible. Several months later, the first snow of winter began to fall over the city. White flakes drifted quietly from the sky, covering rooftops, streets and trees in a blanket of silver. Felix stood beside a window, watching the snowfall in silence. The reflection staring back at him looked familiar, but different. Not because life had suddenly become perfect. It hadn't. There were still difficult days, still moments when anxiety returned unexpectedly, still nights when old fears whispered from the shadows. Healing had never been a straight path. It was messy, slow, sometimes frustrating, but it was real. And that was enough. Felix gently smiled as he watched people below hurry through the snow. Months ago, he would have felt disconnected from the scene, like someone observing life from far away. Now he felt present. Part of it alive inside it. The difference wasn't dramatic. It was found in little things, sleeping without fear, laughing without forcing it, being honest when he wasn't okay, allowing himself to rest, allowing himself to be human. The hardest lesson had not been learning how to be strong. It had been learning how to be vulnerable, to admit when he was struggling, to trust that people would stay, to believe he was worthy of love even on the days he wasn't smiling. The apartment door opened behind him. Voices immediately filled the room, laughter, footsteps, the familiar chaos of people who cared about each other. Felix turned around and smiled, a real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. Hyunjin walked in carrying bags of food. Why are you standing there looking dramatic again? Felix laughed. I wasn't being dramatic. You were staring out the window like the main character of a sad movie. Maybe I am. Impossible, you're too short. Felix immediately threw a pillow at him. Hyunjin barely dodged. The room exploded with laughter. For a moment everything felt wonderfully normal. And that was the miracle. Months ago, Felix thought he had to carry every burden alone. Months ago, he believed people only loved the strongest version of him. Months ago, he had sat on the floor of a dark practice room convinced nobody would understand. Now he knew how wrong he had been. The people who truly cared about him had never expected perfection. They never wanted a version of him that smiled through pain. They simply wanted him, the real him, with all his strengths, all his flaws, all his fears. As evening arrived, the group eventually drifted into conversations and laughter. The warmth inside the apartment contrasted beautifully with the cold world outside. At some point, Felix stepped onto the balcony alone. Snowflakes landed softly on his coat. The city shimmered beneath him, peaceful, beautiful. He remembered that night, the storm, the notebook. The tears he had tried so hard to hide. Back then he thought that moment represented his breaking point. Now he understood it differently. It had been a beginning, the beginning of honesty, the beginning of healing, the beginning of learning that vulnerability was not weakness. A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Hyunjin stepped onto the balcony. You disappeared again. Felix smiled, just thinking, dangerous activity. Felix rolled his eyes, some things never changed. They stood together quietly, watching the snow fall across the sleeping city. For a long time neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. The silence carried its own meaning. Eventually Felix looked toward the sky. Snowflakes drifted endlessly through the darkness, beautiful because they fell, not despite it. And suddenly he understood something that had taken him years to learn. People were the same. Broken moments didn't make someone less valuable. Pain didn't make someone harder to love. Struggling didn't make someone weak, it simply made them human. A soft breath escaped him, not from sadness, from peace, the kind of peace that arrives after surviving a long storm, the kind that cannot be rushed, the kind that must be earned. Hyunjin noticed the smile on his face, a genuine one, calm, steady, different from before. You seem happy. Felix looked out at the city lights one final time, then he nodded, not because every problem was gone, not because life was perfect, but because for the first time in a very long while he wasn't hiding from himself anymore, and that made all the difference. The snow continued to fall. The city continued to glow. And standing beneath the winter sky, surrounded by people who loved him for exactly who he was, Felix finally allowed himself to believe something he had spent years doubting. He was enough. He had always been enough. And with that quiet realization warming his heart more than any winter coat ever could, Felix smiled toward the future and stepped back inside, leaving the darkness behind and carrying hope with him into the light. The end.